In this video, we're talking about the difference between foam and microfiber pads and talking about the situations where it is better to use one or the other. Now let's get straight into it. What's going on? So glad you're here and welcome back to the Wilson Auto Detailing community. If you're a pro detailer or a car enthusiast who wants to improve your detailing ability, then definitely consider subscribing. So this is a question I get probably at least 5 times a week. What's the difference between a foam pad and a microfiber pad, and when do I know to use one or the other? So my goal here is to do a very simple, more or less overgeneralization to quickly answer that question. So you can see here I've got an array of different foam and microfiber pads that I use on a regular basis, weekly basis, monthly basis. Some of them are very used, some of them are not very used. But here's where I want to start with the difference between these two. Let's talk about the main difference. Probably, by and large, in the detailing world, most detailers would agree the main difference between a microfiber pad and a foam pad is that, generally speaking, a microfiber pad is going to be more geared for cutting or compounding, and a foam pad is more geared for finishing or high glossing polish. Now again, as with many of my videos, this one actually in particular, you have to take it in context and make sure that you understand that these things that I'm saying right now are not necessarily true 100% of the time. They're true most of the time. So for example, though a microfiber pad is more geared for cutting and a foam is more geared for finishing, there are microfiber finishing pads. For example, this is a microfiber finishing pad. So again, I would use this to finish even though it's a microfiber pad, rather than cut, even though the rule of thumb is that a microfiber pad is more geared for cutting than necessarily finishing. Now, while generally speaking, detailers agree that microfiber pads are more geared towards cutting and foam is more for finishing, this is a good example of another break in that rule, in that this is a foam pad that I use with my Max Shine polisher with my 5-inch backing plate, and this is a foam pad, but it is a cutting pad. So again, this represents a break in that rule that I just said, in that this is a foam pad, but it's for cutting. Now let's talk about the difference between foam finishing and foam cutting pads. Probably the main difference between foam finishing pads and foam cutting pads is very, very obvious, and the more you get your hands on more pads, the more you'll probably see this is true. But a foam finishing pad is going to be very, very soft. So for example, this is a foam finishing pad from 3D Car Care, and it's their spider pad. So you can see there's like, it's almost like this checkered pattern here, these like crosshatch lines. They do that because it actually is supposed to kind of extend the life of your polish. What I mean by that is sometimes it will help less polish go a longer way. So rather than just having a big piece of foam, it kind of helps spread the polish, and rather than having to use more, you can actually use less and still get more. But again, this is a finishing pad, and so generally speaking, a finishing pad is going to be very, very soft. So you can see here, it's just very, very, very soft foam, whereas this Max Shine pad that is for cutting, even though it is still a foam pad, you can see it's much, much harder, and it might be difficult to pick up in the camera, but you can even see as I kind of press down, it's almost like a memory foam. You can see my fingerprints in there, so check that out. It's very, very, very firm foam, okay? So for obvious reasons, this is much, much firmer because it is for compounding. It's for the aggressive work. It's for the heavy lifting, the heavy duty polishing, right? And so the main difference, again, between the finishing pad and the cutting pad that are both in the foam category is basically going to be the firmness between the two. Now, this is another foam cutting pad that I actually don't use anymore because it's just so worn. I need to buy another one, but it's by Chemical Guys, and it's called their Hexalogic pad. This is a foam cutting pad. Again, it's a good example of the foam cutting pad. It's very, very firm, so when I press down, it doesn't squish like the finishing pads do. It's very, very firm, and much like the spider pads by 3D Car Care, the Hexalogic or the hexagon patterns in here are designed to kind of extend the life of your polish so that you can use a little bit and go a little bit longer way. So again, it supposedly is supposed to kind of spread out the polish. Now, when you compare this really hard cutting foam pad to this really soft pad, check this out, another foam pad, but you guys can see the difference kind of just like in the, I don't even know how to describe it exactly, but basically just like the ease of I don't know, squish, basically. That's probably the best way to say it. The ease of the squish, how firm or not firm it is basically going to determine how aggressive or non-aggressive it is within the foam cutting, foam polishing, foam finishing world. Now moving to microfiber pads, again, most of the time a microfiber pad is going to be for heavy lifting, heavy cutting, and a foam pad is going to be more for maybe medium to light to finishing, polishing. That's the general rule. However, this little duo right here is a great example of a cutting and a finishing microfiber pad. So here's the finishing pad, here's the cutting pad. The main difference when it comes to microfiber cutting and microfiber finishing, you'll find that with microfiber cutting pads or microfiber compounding pads is that the fibers on the pad begin to get a little bit more coarse. What I mean by that is the microfibers here are more almost, maybe a good way to describe it would be they're almost thicker. They're more clumped together. Whereas with a microfiber finishing pad, the fibers here are much, much more fine. If I had to put an analogy to it, I would probably say it's like comparing 800 grit sandpaper with 3000 grit sandpaper, right? The 3000 grit sandpaper is very fine. It's gonna be the finishing step before you start polishing. The 800 grit is very coarse. There's a lot of grit to it, a lot of bite to it, and that's gonna be more of your first step, first compounding, first sanding step, right? So you have more coarse fibers for the cutting step, and then you have more fine fibers for the finishing step. Another really good thing to note, and again, this is a general rule, but with microfiber pads, generally speaking, they're going to have a foam interface. So what I mean by that is between the back Velcro part of the pad, assuming you're using a DA, and then the microfibers themselves, you have this foam interface right here. And you actually have the same thing with this cutting pad, it's just much thinner. This is a good example of what you will find very often in the detailing world. The more cut, the more bite, the more compounding a microfiber pad is designed to do, normally the less of an interface of foam it has. In the same way, a microfiber pad that is more geared towards finishing, not only does it have finer microfibers on it, and it's much, much, much finer, much softer, it also has a thicker foam interface. Now, why is that? Well, you can probably guess just from like logical, deductive reasoning, right? But the less foam interface you have, the more aggressive the microfibers and the polish can be towards the paint, because it's almost like there's less cushion when you're putting pressure down on the paint. There's less cushion that's absorbing kind of the pressure that you're putting. So for example, the same is true when you're dealing with a foam pad that's for cutting or a foam pad that's for finishing. Generally speaking, foam pads that are for finishing are very soft and fairly thick for that reason exactly. It's able to kind of almost like absorb the pressure you're putting down on it, and it eases up on the paint. In other words, it's not biting into the paint at such a high degree, whereas when you have a foam pad that's really, really firm, the more pressure you put, there's really nothing absorbing that pressure. Because this is so firm, there's very little squish to it. So it's kind of like the difference between dropping an egg on a really, really, really fluffy pillow and then dropping an egg on a really, really, really flat pillow. One is going to absorb way more of the shock, and one is not really going to absorb the shock at all, and the egg is probably going to break. When you're cutting into the paint, you don't have a lot of that shock being absorbed, because again, these microfiber cutting pads have a very thin foam interface. When you have a finishing polish and you're kind of wanting to do more finishing work, more glossing work, less aggressive cutting into the paint, cutting into the swirls, you're going to have a greater foam interface. So hopefully those analogies kind of make sense. It was probably a little confusing the way I said that, but it kind of makes just logical sense. When you're doing more finishing work, when you're doing lighter work, you want something that absorbs more of that shock and almost allows the pressure that you're putting on the paint to be absorbed, to be lightened. Whereas when you're cutting into the paint, you want that foam interface to be lesser, just because you're wanting to bite into the paint. You're wanting the pressure you put down to actually be put down onto the paint. You don't want a lot of that to be absorbed by this foam interface. So it's really no wonder why this subject of foam pads and microfiber pads is confusing, just because not only is there kind of a lot to understand about it, but there's so many options on the market that it's difficult to figure out even what pads you should buy. But again, by and large, the general rule in the auto detailing industry is microfiber with a DA is more geared for cutting, foam with a DA is more geared for finishing. But as I explained in this video, you guys see that within the foam category, within the microfiber category, there are cutting and finishing pads. So again, it's difficult, much like most things with the detailing world, it's difficult to paint really broad strokes over this and say, this is what these are for every single time, and this is what these are for every single time, because again, you could fully correct and finish a car just using microfiber, or you could fully correct and finish a car just using foam, because again, you have foam cutting, foam finishing, you have microfiber cutting, microfiber finishing pads, but again, general rule, microfiber cutting, foam finishing. So I hope this video helped you. Below in the YouTube description box, I'm gonna link up a ton of different pads. And so if you're looking to get some microfiber pads or foam pads, you just don't know which ones to get, check out the YouTube description box below. They're gonna be Amazon links to take you to all of these pads that I do hook up. Definitely start experimenting with different pads, just because different guys have different preferences in what they do like. And so many times people get the paralysis by analysis and say, I don't know which pad to get, and so I just don't know what I should buy, and they end up not buying anything. And the truth is, if you would just go ahead and pull the trigger and buy some of these foam or microfiber pads and just start seeing the results you get, you'd probably be able to really easily pinpoint what you start to like and what you start to really not like so much. So definitely check out the Amazon links in the description box below. If you use my links to purchase any of these foam pads or microfiber pads, it does give this channel a small commission, but it helps this channel stay alive so I can keep giving out awesome content just like this all the time. And if you are new to the Wilson Auto Detailing community and you are a pro detailer or a car enthusiast who wants to improve your detailing ability and business, then definitely subscribe. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always from Luke here at Wilson Auto Detailing, keep working hard, and I will see you guys in the next video.